Hello, another video in my series of, in my opinion, I've always to add, in my opinion, underrated albums. Today I'm talking about Hissing Fauna, Are You the Destroyer of Montreal. I think they had 4, 5, 6 albums before that. My favorite of the albums that came before probably the Gay Parade and especially Sunlandic Twins. Sunlandic Twins was the album before Hissing Fauna. I think around the time of Sunlandic Twins I became a fan of Montreal. I think the best phase was the 3 albums Sunlandic Twins, Hissing Fauna, Are You the Destroyer, and the next album Skeletal Lamping. I think Skeletal Lamping also was the biggest commercial success. It's probably the most pop classic pop oriented album, if you can even say that about the band of Montreal. But today we are going to talk about Hissing Fauna, You the Destroyer, which in my opinion is the big masterpiece of that group, and as always, underrated. Fans of the group will say this is not underrated, this is either their best or one of the 2 or 3 best albums. And it was, as I said, and Skeletal Lamping was probably the commercial most successful, but this was the first album that charted in the US, so after that the next 3 or 4 albums also charted, but this was like the first album that gained a bit more attention and it got brilliant reviews, so I don't think it's very underrated in that sense, but I think it's underrated to a general audience. I think this is one of those indie albums that would have deserved even more commercial success, that should have been, should have made this band really big, like an Arcade Fire. I would say my 2 favorite albums from the noughties, from that first decade in the 21st century, are Funeral by Arcade Fire and this album. And Arcade Fire, became huge and won Grammys and things like that. And of Montreal, after the album after that, after Skeletal Lamping, I think they went on a downward spiral and they never achieved the big success they would have deserved. And as I said, this is my favorite album from that decade, alongside Funeral, but I think this is my favorite album from that decade, and Funeral is my number 2 album from that decade. And it came out in various configurations. Initially I bought the CD because back in 2007 I wasn't that back into vinyl that heavily. I still bought CDs, so I thought I'd buy this CD. They released an EP around the same time with extra stuff, and the EP was called Icons Abstract Fee. It's always difficult with the album and song and EP titles, they're very abstract titles. And this is a great EP, and especially the lead-off track of that EP, Du og Meg, which is Norwegian for you and me, I think. And this is one of their best songs, and so later when I bought the vinyl, on the vinyl, the songs from the EP are also on the vinyl version, so, you should go for the vinyl if you're interested in buying that album. But besides that great EP, the album itself is great, has great, songs like Suffer for Fashion or Heimdallsgate, like a Promethean Curse. The titles are very complicated, as I said. At the time were like indie hits, in the indie clubs you could hear those songs, so they were quite popular. But also the rest of the album is just one brilliant song after the other. There's one central song to that album, The Past is a Grotesque Animal, it's longer than 10 minutes and it's always the same. Is it 2 or 3 chords? It's the same chord sequence all the way through. It's a bit like a modern Tomorrow Never Knows, a psychedelic stream of consciousness kind of song. And it also divides the album, I think, into 2 parts. I think it was, a loose concept album where the mastermind Kevin Barnes, describes him transforming into a different person, very weird, very paranoid, very psychotic, very drug-fueled, crazy album, and you know the concept is like he's transforming into another entity. Where, you know, I never get all those concepts really. I'm not, you know, that interested in rock operas and things like that. But you know, again, that's very interesting. Yeah, it's a very strange album, and my favorite songs of the CD version, you know, at least, are the two last songs. You know, it's already a brilliant album at that point, and then it's like a medley. The last two songs, She's a Rejecter, and I have to read it again. We Were Born the Mutants again with Liefling, whatever that means. They are like intervened like a medley, and you know, brilliant. You know, when I used to be a DJ, like 10 years ago, I often would play those two songs, you know, in sequence, and it's usually one of those songs, and someone in the club will come up to you and ask you what this is, and this is great. You know, it's one of those songs no one really knows, but when you play it, everybody or many people will love it. And it's a great album of Montreal, also great live band. I've seen them twice. The first time was probably maybe one of the 5 best concerts I've ever attended. You know, great show with costumes and you know, like a theater play almost. It was in Nice, and I think the thumbnail photo to that video, this video, will be from that show when I took a photo, when my girlfriend took a photo with me and Kevin Barnes after the show, which is great. And the second show was in Vienna 5 years after that. That wasn't really that great of a show. You could really tell that the band had lost their momentum by that point. I also think that some of the later albums, you know, albums after this album, Skeletal Lamping, didn't really do it for me anymore that much. You know, 1 or 2 songs per album are always great usually, but this is the high water mark in their career, I would say, and the album after that is not almost as good, but a very, very good album. And as I said, the albums before that, especially Sunlandic Twins, also Satanic Panic in the Attic, Gay Parade, all great albums. So, you know, if someone, you know, how can I describe the style? You know, they changed very much through their career. In the early days they were more like a folk band, weird folk, anti-folk, but always with glam elements. And by the time they made this album, they really incorporated lots of electronic sounds into their sound as well, and it got more electrified and more danceable. And after that, you know, it again morphed into something different. But I think this was the sound that benefited them the most. This was also the lineup of the band, I think personally, you know, it's just my opinion, which was the best lineup with, you know, the flamboyant Brian Poole in the band, great guitar player, and you know, this was also, the band was also associated with the second wave of the Elephant Six movement, which was a loose underground indie artist collective in the USA. Started out, I think, in Georgia with bands like Apples in Stereo and Neutral Milk Hotel, and of Montreal, also from Georgia. I think Athens, the same city as R.E.M. are from, so they're not from Montreal. But you know, great band, great album. Yeah, I think more people should know about that album.